All right, I think we'll get started. Morning, everyone. We will be sharing a PowerPoint for most of this, so that'll be the main screen. We also will have some discussion, and for that part, we'll ask you to use the chat and also feel free to unmute yourself and speak so we can have a bit more of a dialogue later in this work. But thank you all for joining us. I'm going to share my screen. So today's session, as you know, is Collaborative Leadership for Social Change, Building Relationships Through a Listening Tour. I'm Joanna. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a PhD student in American Culture Studies and a graduate assistant in the Center for Public Impact. Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie Evans. I'm a graduate student in public administration, and my pronouns are she, her as well, and I work with Joanna in the Center for Public Impact.
So first of all, why are we talking about collaboration for leadership today? Many of you, particularly those of you who have participated in leadership development at BG, are familiar with the social change model of leadership. This model of leadership is an approach to leadership that's focused on leadership as a collaborative process in which individuals contribute their unique perspectives and skills to work toward shared goals that contribute to social change. To work effectively with others requires both an understanding of yourself as well as an understanding of the people that you're working with. So today we're going to explore how you can develop an understanding of yourself and how you relate to certain social issues through personal reflection, and then also then how you can develop a strategy to connect and learn from other individuals and organizations who are also either working to address or are impacted by that social issue.
And I'm going to talk just a bit about the other piece of that, which is the listening tour that we decided to kind of call part of our discussion today. And I have a very chatty cat this morning, so if you hear meowing, that is what that is. But when Joanna and I first talked about collaborating on this project, a specific area that I wanted to contribute was the importance of listening and learning from the community. So often today in our society, we want to create change quickly and think that we have an avenue forward that is correct to create change. But essentially, I kind of thought maybe taking a step back and listening to folks that have expertise on the topic, thinking about who needs to be part of a conversation that often hasn't been part of the conversation on a particular social issue. And those kind of pieces lead to ultimately creating more sustainable and intentional social change. So that was sort of why we chose to kind of highlight that aspect of this presentation. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go throughout. And then we also want to make sure that we're kind of all starting off on the same page. So just in terms of our presentation and workshop, make sure that we assume goodwill of the group. We all will share responsibility for quality of this conversation. We welcome all perspectives, and I think it's important to emphasize that everyone's viewpoint is important. We want to share the floor, listen, seek first to understand, and then be understood. Speak for yourself, don't speak for others. Be curious, note differences, and look for common ground. You can disagree with a statement, but not with a person. Avoid judgment, labeling, or belittling. If you disagree with a statement, say so and explain why. It's okay to share ideas and themes from this workshop after today, but not what individuals say. Be present, turn off your cell phones, close tabs. And then are there any other rules that you would like to add? Feel free to drop that in the chat. or unmute yourself to contribute anything else. You can also raise your hand too if you have something you'd like to share, and then we can unmute you as well. All right, seeing none, we'll continue along.
We're just going to provide a quick roadmap to explain the process we'll go through today. So the first thing is that we will ask each of you to identify a social issue you're passionate about, and then reflect on how you relate to this issue through considering your own identities, and then also explore how you can learn more about the social issue and how you can create change by developing a listening tour plan. And then we touched on some of these bullet points under why previously, but just to expand a little bit more, so social change is a collaborative process, and so we're thinking about how each of us in this workshop can engage in that process. Some identities are connected to more privilege and power than others due to systemic barriers in our society, and so different people have different experiences with different social issues. Our identities influence how we understand ourselves and also how we relate to these different social issues. And different people have different knowledge, skills, and resources that they can contribute when collaborating. And again, so different people experience social issues differently. And when you talk about different types of knowledge, I mean, lived experience is a valuable form of knowledge, and having gone through different experiences that influences how we relate to these different social issues. And then we also have like the academic education that gives us a framework for exploring how different social issues work in our society. So we can work with different people who have different experiences and different education and training to better understand social issues. And then the last point is those who are most impacted by an issue must be involved in addressing the issue. So when we're developing collaborative strategies and building coalitions, it's important to consider who's in the room and who's participating in the process. So this is where the interaction begins. And so we can't see you, but we'll hope that you're able to follow along here. And then we'll ask you again to contribute as you feel comfortable either speaking or dropping comments in the chat. Because we would like this to be a dialogue and interactive. So if you have a writing utensil and a piece of paper in front of you, or if you prefer to use your computer, but set yourself up to be able to draw and write. And the first thing we'll ask you to do is to draw a large circle on your piece of paper, and in the middle, write a social issue that you're passionate about that you would like to work on addressing and to learn more about. And once you've identified that issue, consider just why that issue is important to you. And to give you a guide for kind of how this drawing is going to expand as you think. So this middle, I have the image up on the screen. So your social issue would be in the very center. And as you think about, after you think about kind of some reasons that you have chosen that social issue, then also you can add to your drawing by adding that second circle around that and these different. And so we can't hand you a handout, so we're asking you to draw this yourself. So we're going to continue on the personal reflection. So if you need more time on the social issue, please feel free to take that. But for those of you who are ready to move forward, as I said, continue to develop your drawing here with the second larger circle. And then you can see these different categories on the screen, or different identities. And it doesn't capture all identities, but these are kind of the main ones that we talk about. So take some time to look at these different identities and consider your own and write them in your different spaces around the circle. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. And the image on the screen is a bit small, so I'll also just go ahead and read the different identities that are around the circle. So the first one is ethnicity on the top, then socioeconomic status, gender, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, first language, physical, emotional, and developmental disability, age, religious or spiritual affiliation, and race. One more minute to work on filling those in. All right, so now I ask you to reflect on the identities that you wrote down, and answer these questions. First, take some time to answer them for yourself, and then we can also share, maybe if any of you would like to share an answer to in the chat, we'll do that, but take 2 or 3 minutes. And I'll explain why this is important. We're exploring these questions because our identities and experience shape the way that we relate to and understand social issues, like I mentioned before. And we can also think about how identities of others who are impacted by the issue or who address the issue are different from our own, and how, again, people with different identities and different experiences are going to bring different perspectives to the issue. And it's important to learn from and work with people who are most impacted by the issue. So for example, if I chose the issue of food insecurity has a disproportionate impact on certain populations, including households with young children, particularly those with single parents, households of families, Black families and Hispanic families. And I'm an adult, I'm not a parent, I'm white, so I'm not among these groups. So I can't fully understand the systemic barriers that they face that create this disproportionate impact. So I can learn from community organizations that are led by and that support individuals from these communities to better understand the challenges that they face and the effective strategies that they believe in to address it and are working towards to address the issue in these communities. Another example of how identities play into considerations about how to address a social issue is when it comes to food insecurity. Many food pantries are in churches, and research indicates that individuals of non-Christian faiths may not feel comfortable going to a church to go to a food pantry or a soup kitchen. Um, and also, certain religions have certain dietary needs. So if a family or individual um, is kosher or halal, and they need foods that meet those requirements, and a food pantry does not have that, then they might not be able to even use the food that's available to them. So when thinking about community organizations to learn from and work with, we want to include organizations that have representation from these different groups to imagine inclusive ways of addressing the issue. So, and give you a few minutes just to think about your own identities and how you relate to the social issue you wrote down. Would anybody like to share their responses, particularly the questions 4, 5, and 6? Nikisha, raised hand. If you can unmute yourself if you'd like, or you're welcome to use the chat however you.
Well, good morning, you guys. I'm going to attempt to try to answer these. So for me, the issue that I chose was rebuilding like the legal system, particularly like the DAs and the officials who are getting elected in, because you know, people think that like it's the cops, but it actually goes a lot deeper than that. So for me, my race had the strongest effect on like how I relate and I understand and I actually experience this issue. I actually have people who have been affected by like racist DAs and elected officials. The identity that had the least effect was my religion, and that's just mainly because I've kind of varied away from my religious upbringing as a child, and what identities might the people who are impacted. I think maybe gender would be like their identity. That would be like the main difference. But I think like the people that I know, most of them are like of my race and ethnicity. So yeah, that's what I have. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing. Is there anybody else that'd like to share? See Layla's hand is raised.
Okay. So my social issue was Native American mascots in public schools. It's an issue that hits really hard for me. It's something I've been involved with over the past year trying to change. So for 4, 5, and 6, which of your identities have the strongest effect on you, on how you understand and experience the social issue and identified? I'd say my race and the lack of culture thereof, because I don't know exactly what Native Americans are going through. I know it's hard. I know being in public school is another form of whitewashing, but because I don't understand that, and I'll never fully know the extent of it, I want to do as much as I can to change that so that others don't have to suffer. The things that least affect that are probably my gender and sexual orientation. It kind of just has nothing to do with it. And what identities, what might the people who are impacted by the social issue you choose have that are different from you? Again, race and culture. There is so much different from a white perspective and a Native American perspective. That's all.
I was muted. Thanks for sharing. Would anybody else like to share?
I can share if you can hear me. I'm not sure if I'm unmuted or not.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. So my social issue that I chose is the representation of diversity in both in media and in a lot of government style groups, it's like similar to how we have community organizations and student organizations on campus, both for race and ethnicity, as well as members of the LGBTQ plus group as well. The identities that have had the strongest effect on how I understand, well, I myself am gay, so that part of the LGBT representation I understand very well, and it's definitely a really close issue for me as well. As well as I don't really have a set or like defined religion, and that can be a very interesting factor in a lot of these situations. In terms of things that have had the least effect on how I understand are the fact that I am young, white, and my first language is English. So there are definitely some barriers that I don't fully understand the extent of issues that people who are people of color and people who have first languages that aren't white go through. And then the most different identities that people within the same social issue would have would probably be race, age, and language. And then that's it.
Thank you. And Catherine, thank you for sharing in the chat as well. We have a variety of social issues. So now, for the sake of time, we're going to move on to the next step, and there'll be continued opportunities to share as we go through this process.
Great. So as Joanna said, we're going to kind of continue to talk about this, but focusing in on listening. And we are thinking about probably going to break you up into about 3 breakout rooms. But if you are interested and comfortable sharing, feel free to drop your social issue in the chat. So we can kind of get a sense of what all of the social issues that you're interested in are. But once we break into groups, we're going to ask actually that you in each breakout room, maybe we don't have the capacity to do breakout rooms, which is okay. So we will kind of go from there, but that's good feedback. So yeah, we do ask that if you are interested, please drop your social issue in the chat. And then thinking about kind of your social issue, just kind of then working through some of these questions or comments that we have underneath of this component. So identify groups who are most impacted by your social issue on campus and in the community. Identify additional groups or organizations that might have expertise regarding this issue. Identify key decision makers relating to the issue, or institutions and associations, and then identify people that should be involved in decision-making about this issue that are not typically involved in the decision-making process. And write these groups and organizations around the issue in the middle of your circle. Got some great social issues dropped in the chat as well, so feel free to kind of look at other social issues. Give you a little bit of time to work through these questions. So as you're kind of working through some of these questions, we do have an example that we included on the slide, and I can talk a little bit about the example. So, you know, Joanna kind of talked about the different layers earlier when talking about food insecurity, about how our own individual identities impact how we think about a social issue. But then again, it's important to think about others. So one specific example that I included is in a natural disaster, everybody in a community is impacted in some way or another, but there are many different layers and complexities to that impact. So one specific example that I included there is that farm work and farm workers are particularly impacted, especially migrant farm workers. And part of that is due to the livelihood not being often accessible, to land getting destroyed, and other factors. And you know, we kind of think about how the natural disaster may impact everybody, but migrant farm workers have to move to different communities often if a disaster comes through, and then kids are pulled out of school and different things. So thinking about kind of what the impact uniquely may be, and then specifically in terms of expertise, who's going to have local knowledge of issues. So though in that specific regard, local nonprofits that provide social services and youth opportunities may be particularly relevant to contact. And then, you know, the Red Cross as a nonprofit nationally is going to have expertise on natural disasters when they occur and those kind of things. So like thinking through kind of what your issue is, what kind of nonprofits you know about or institutions you know about that are going to have that expertise, and then how complex these issues can be in terms of who they most impact, or impact in different ways than how we would be impacted by different challenges. Would anybody like to share a bit about their social issue in terms of who they've identified, you know, as being most impacted, or who you've identified as being additional groups that you may want to contact with expertise in terms of your specific social issue, or who are the key decision makers in regards to your social issue? Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to share. We're asking you some tough questions at 10 in the morning, I know. All right, Layla, feel free.
Okay, so again, my social issue was Native American mascots in schools. So the groups who are most impacted by the social issue are Native American students and their families. And the additional groups and organizations, again, Native American students who are attending the public schools and are alumni of public schools, and their respective tribes and communities. The key decision-making institutions that are related to this issue, as of last year, it was the school board, or at least in my experience, it was the school board, and all of the students' families, not just Native American students, like the students and the whole school, their family or they could come talk at a school board meeting in the public comments, and that really influenced the public or the school board. And sometimes in a situation like this, it doesn't really need to be the students' families, or at least all the students' families. It needs to be specifically the people who are being impacted by the issue at hand. The people that should be involved in this decision-making issue are the Native American students, again, who I just said this, who are impacted by the mascot. They should be involved in the process, and then also their respective tribes again.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Layla. Are there Any other folks that would like to share? Maybe someone who hasn't shared already? We do have a comment in the chat. So from Tori, people that are most impacted by climate change are likely to be lower income communities. Not sure about specific decision-making institutions, but definitely people in higher governmental positions making decisions on policies that affect income as well as climate policies. And then individuals and the younger population should have a say about what goes on, since it will be affecting our future as well. So, in that regard, if, sort of mobilizing young people in terms of your issue is one pathway. There are young professional groups or community-oriented groups around young people teaching leadership skills, things like that, right? Those could be some specific types of organizations. There are a lot of in terms of community organizations across the country, lots of sort of environmental related community groups, Sierra societies, other kinds of groups like that. So those could be good. But in some respects, even in regards to the example I talked about earlier with natural disasters, right? Natural disaster and climate change has some connection. And so some of the same social groups could be relevant in both of those types of scenarios. And then Catherine also included in the chat that people of color with lower socioeconomic status, homeless are most impacted by food insecurity. Food pantries, city social workers may have more expertise. Decision-making institutions would be those who make laws and policies about food stamp distribution. Exactly. So those are some really great examples. And kind of at this point, thinking about, even if we don't yet know who the local experts are on a topic, that's in some respects part of kind of where we're going next, which is the importance of hearing from other people on issues, the importance of figuring out who in the community has that expertise, who in the community should be part of the decision-making process or collaboration process in terms of thinking about social change with your specific issue. So that sort of that priority in terms of who should be included. Would anyone else like to share? Feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand before we move on. We can go ahead then and go to the next slide. Great. So basically, once you kind of have an idea about your social issue and maybe a starting point in terms of who you might want to reach out to first, the way that I would kind of think about it in terms of the issue is thinking about a community panel, not necessarily all at once, but basically thinking that if there's this issue and if there are varied layers, if you're thinking about folks in lower income communities, if you're thinking about food stamp distribution, if you're thinking about generational poverty, and is there a nonprofit that works on, strategies to curb that, right? Who should be at the table? And, it doesn't necessarily have to be all at once, but thinking about how you can reach out to those folks and start that conversation. And a great avenue, if you don't have a good starting point or not quite sure who to reach out to, is to just start to do some research. If you have a specific idea, for example, like, if you're dealing with climate change, what are the national and local nonprofits, and then who is their executive director or who is their communications person that might be able to schedule a meeting, thinking about kind of those groups. Groups that are making policy. Can you talk to a legislative aide for your local legislator? Whatever the case may be. Who can you start the conversation with that will be able to give you that added layer of expertise? So here you can see that we'd like you to continue to use your circle to write maybe 1 to 2 people that are part of the groups that you've identified, right? So if you've identified a nonprofit, who might a contact be? If you don't have a specific nonprofit, but you have kind of a general idea, for example, if you're working in the environment, Googling in Wood County or Lucas County, who are nonprofits that are sort of around the environment, right? So this might take a little bit of thinking through, and it's okay if you don't have specifics right now, but this is that piece that is kind of next steps in terms of before you can really intentionally create social change, thinking about who you want to bring into the conversation, who you need to work with, and who you need to hear from to make sure that you actually are coming up with a community-oriented solution to an issue. And also in the chat, we have from Kaden, people most impacted by trans health and housing are trans individuals, especially people of color, Black trans women, trans individuals who are from low-income communities, the government and state officials who make laws, regulations, and policies. There are not many housing opportunities geared toward trans individuals or healthcare that supports. There is little to no trans people who are able to speak for themselves and hold positions to make any change. There is a kind of clarifying question. So Catherine, feel free to answer that question in the chat as well. And then in kind of one specific example in that last comment, I did want to share, there is a really great resource in the state of Ohio, Equitas Health, which is one of the largest, I think, LGBTQ healthcare providers in the country, based in Columbus. So we do have a state resource that a lot of other states are not don't have as great of access to. And Equitas does work here in Toledo and Wood County. So that is one specific organization, and then figuring out who you might want to contact in terms of that type of organization. But the next kind of piece is making a plan, right? So like I said, visiting their website, Facebook page, stopping in to introduce yourself, given COVID. So, of course, keep that in mind, what would make sense there. And then the Center for Public Impact, University Hall 100, is a great resource if you're not quite sure sort of how to navigate who you might want to reach out to. But the kind of follow-up on my earlier example in terms of who we wanted to reach out to. So I was planning a service trip with college students to North Carolina to do some hurricane relief work. And we did do some building home repair work, but students actually found the most value in those situations by having connection with the homeowners. I think it was interesting to think about the fact that it's a really, in America, it's a large achievement to own your own home. And then a hurricane comes through and you have this investment, but then maybe can't maintain depending on what happens. And there was one particular story that people really resonated with, where a woman's husband had just died and she had some mental health issues and had to leave her job. So she moved to North Carolina right before the storm hit, and had bought a house and then had all this damage done. And it complicated a lot of what people already thought about in terms of both natural disasters, but also who is most impacted, and maybe the narrative in our country that a lot of people are asking for help, and maybe it's not as deserved or whatever the case may be, but that people are in all kinds of unique situations and have diverse needs given something. And then we also did work with an organization called the East Coast Migrant Head Start Project, which, as I kind of said, was looking at migrant farm working families and how to provide resources and support given all of that. So do want to see, yeah. So in terms of next steps, would anybody like to share their anything else about their issue, or in anywhere in particular you might sort of be going with your issue, who you might be reaching out to? Feel free to raise your hand. It's okay if you don't. I know that this kind of webinar structure is hard to facilitate some interaction, but the main takeaway here is that we have social issues. We all need to learn more about our, the areas in which that we're passionate about, and we think we need to cause change in, and so learning from the community is a great avenue to build more intentional solutions to problems and to capitalize on community expertise and recognize that often communities most impacted are the communities that need to be part of the solution. So Joanna is putting in the chat as well some resources that you can take with you. The United Way is a great sort of one-stop shop in terms of thinking about what kind of work is being done in a community, and then our website as well. Kind of with that, I think one other piece is building relationships shouldn't just be, okay, I need to build a relationship with a person of color in this community because they have a different expertise and can share that expertise with me. It should be about building relationships that are genuine and authentic in general, right? So when you're in part of an organization, just having good rapport with your colleagues and your friends and your peers already established helps you kind of create that vision and that collaboration as you go on in terms of making social change within an institution or in a community. And then there was something in a chat about service trips. Yeah, so Joanna put a link in the chat in terms of what service trips we have available at Bowling Green. I previously worked in student affairs for a couple years in a small private college, and that was where I took those students on that trip. So other questions in the chat, or if anybody would like to raise a hand and ask a question? We're about at time, and my cat's starting to make an appearance here, so feel free to ask a question in the chat or raise your hand. Otherwise, yeah. Otherwise, I think that's about it for us. Joanna, do you have anything else to add?
No, thank you all for joining us. And just to reiterate, this is to just help you start thinking about how to build coalitions. So hopefully you can look to some of these resources we shared. The Center for Public Impact is always happy to set up an individual appointment these days via Zoom, but in non-COVID times also just stop by our office and we can talk to you about what social issues you're interested in particularly, and then help connect you to local community partners that you can work with. And the alternative breaks, just to expand on that a little bit, they're breaks during spring break or winter break, sometimes some weekends, to go do a longer term project with a community partner kind of all over the country. So that's a little bit different these days also, but an opportunity to really get a little more in-depth experience and understanding of a certain social issue and how a community partner addresses that. And I feel free to send an email also to us if you have questions, or the Center for Public Impact, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day with the conference.